All right. So, first topic for today is talking about lifting state and props handling and when to decide that your state needs to go out of your component and where to put it. So we're going to do this just as a quick example first so that we can talk about it without doing anything really complicated, and then we'll jump into our shopping app and build that cart feature, which will just be an extra reinforcement, perhaps. Feel free to stop me at any time. Let's jump into things. Okay, so we have a sandbox application here. There's nothing in it. This is all garbage from the template when you do v create React app or v create or whatever the command is. Not create React app. That's the old command. So I'm just going to take all this stuff out. Can get rid of this app.css that we don't really want right now. And we will just make this paragraph element for now. And verify that we can see this in our browser. Cool. So we just have paragraph that says to do. It's a little off-centered, but I think we can make that work. Actually, I'm going to take all this out too. We'll just have a very, very blank application. All right, cool. So let's say I have an application and my application consists of trying to think of a good example. So many examples, I can't even narrow it down. Let's say that we have another component in here and we're gonna have this component be we'll make this like a social media post. Ooh, actually, let's do even better than that. Let's do like a comment thread under a post. So let's do this. We might have a post.jsx up here. And this is a component which will eventually render some more stuff in there, but we're just going to export it by default. And then our app will just consist of a post for now. Maybe in the future we have multiple posts. And this will be self-closing because we're not going to put content in there. But our post is another thing that is composed of other elements. So I'm going to have my post, and then inside of my post, I might have a bunch of different comments. This is another component, and this is going to be composed of stuff that we haven't done yet. Let's say a comment has a bunch of different properties to it. So a comment has an author who made it, a date of when it was created, and a body, which is the text. So if I were to create some JSX for this really quick, I would probably want to put it in a box. And then inside of that box, I would put I don't know, maybe a header 6. So it's a header, but it's really small. And I want to display the author first, which we'll just say is me for now. And then we want to have a date here. So this was created on July 11th, 2024. And then we have a paragraph down here. This should have been H6. This paragraph is, that was a really funny post. Nice work. And then our post is just a box. And inside that box, we have an image that is being posted. That links to somewhere. And then we have a bunch of comments in here. All right, cool. So this is our basic structure of our application. If I look at it, there's no image yet, so let's just pull an image from Google Images. Yellowstone National Park. Can't spell. Copy image link. I think that this is gonna work. Oh, it worked. Crazy. All right, so this is our structure. We have a bunch of different posts, and they each have an image and a list of comments that go underneath them. Well, right now everything is hard coded, and I will need to find a way to make this no longer hard coded so that I can display a number of different posts on top of each other and maybe separate them and stuff like that. And also inside of each post have several comments that are related to it. So I got to figure out where all of this is going to live, because right now this is living nowhere. We need some way to represent our data in a bunch of objects in a list, and we got to figure out where that needs to go. So this is step number one when you're deciding where you're going to put the state. We need to consider where all of this state needs to be accessed. Right now, I have a post which is composed of data. Ooh, this is really disgusting. Ignore that. Actually, no, we're just going to fix that image because it's going to bother me otherwise. Open link in new tab. No. Open image in new tab. There we go. That's a little better. So we have, we're going to need to maintain a list of all the posts that have been created and all the comments that exist in them, and so on and so forth. So you might think, well, let me just represent a post, and we can hard code data inside of here. Or maybe the post is what's going to control all the comments. So maybe the comments need to live inside of the post class, because this post is going to create a list of comments below it. And the app is going to create a list of posts. So maybe the comments should live in the post and the post should live in the app. Well, all of this needs to be controlled from somewhere. And as soon as we start making our application more complicated, that relationship might break down unless we put it at the top level of what needs access to it. So if I have a comment, comments need to be all the way down in my comments class. So the structure of our application right now is we have an app, which is made up of one or more posts. And inside of each post, we have one or more comments. So my comments need to be accessible from my post. So I could put them in there if I want to, but that will cause problems if our post needs to live somewhere else. If our post lives up here, we need to have some sort of relationship of comment into post. They probably need to live together. Our post should be an object that then references one or more comments underneath it. So those all need to be joined together. Well, can a post live inside of this post component? Probably not. If post lived inside of our post component, then we would have to hard code it in some fashion. I would need to like declare what my post is going to be out here. And if I do it out here, then, well, now our application is garbage. We can't create new posts. We can't pull from an API. We can't do anything. So our posts need to be controlled from our app. Our app needs to render one or more posts, and it needs to assign the data that that particular instance of the post component is going to hold. So my app component is the logical fit here at the top of the tree of what needs access to it to hold all of this state. So what I would do for this application is I would create a state variable for my posts objects. And this can start as an empty array. And as we continue working through our application, we're going to populate this somehow. Maybe I have my dummy data up here, which is an array of several different posts. And then one post has an image source, which is some link that we will put in there. And then it has comments, which is an array. And inside of here, then we have all of our comments, which have an author. And they have a date. And they have a body, which is some comment body. So this is the relationship of my data. This data for right now just comes as hard-coded values. But I think in this assignment for your to-do list, you create your form in such a way that you can add new data properties or add new pieces of data to your list. So if I hold my posts up here, I could then create a separate component, add new, create new post. This would be a component. And in here, we probably have a form that does some stuff. And we have a button type equals submit. This should look familiar. And so on and so forth. Well, if I create a post from inside of this class, that would imply that I need access in some capacity to my list of posts that I created up here. I can't put my list of posts inside of my create new post component. If I do this, my tree is going to look like this. I can't put my state in here, because if I put it in here, well, then all of these other posts don't have access to it. In general, when you create state, state should always flow down into child components. If I create state inside of my create new post component, then I cannot just give it to a neighboring component that's not a child. There's no direct React way of doing this. And so instead, I need to take this state and I need to put it one level higher up, because this state needs to be accessible in my creation form, which is what you guys are doing. You're adding a new to-do item to your list, but it also needs to be distributed to all of the to-do items. Or in your case, for your homework assignments, you have a to-do list, and then it's composed of multiple to-do items. And so you store your to-dos up here in your app component, and you give them to your list, which then pushes them out into several different items. But we can also have our add to-do form over here, which will also get access to your objects. So the way we do this is we pass state down into a child component using a property. So I can create my props object and I can pass down my current set of posts, which I don't need to do in this particular component, but inside of my post, I would probably pass down a specific object. And then from here, I can replace the source with post object dot image. And this is going to give me a red squiggle because I'm not validating my props. I hate that it does this by default. And now it goes away. And then I can give it my comment, and we probably need to give this post object dot, or rather, we'd probably like do a map call here. And we pass our individual comment in as a property. So again, we're taking our state, we're passing it down to the children by creating a property and then passing it to that property. So in my app, I would do post obj is equal to post. And here we'd also probably do a map call. And pass it down like that. Now, if I want to update my posts from anywhere in my application, I, in this case, probably want to update it from inside of my post object. Maybe I want to delete this post. I also want to be able to update my list from my create form. I want to be able to add a new post. Well, I need access to this state that exists up here. I don't have any direct access. There's no React way to just grab the state from an arbitrary component, like we said. And so what I do in that case is I pass down a property. And instead of passing the state itself, I pass a function that serves as a handler. So I have my function here. And I can update my state by adding it. And then I can pass a reference to this function as a property to whatever component needs access to it. So in this case, I want to be able to add a new post. I can't just give the state directly because there's no way to update it if I just give the state. This is just an array. But I can give my child a way to access my state. And that allows you to flow events back up the chain so that they modify state in a higher component. And then when that state changes, it causes all of your children to re-render again, and you pass down the new state. So if I go into create new post, I have a property now, add new post. And then on submit, and we'll submit. And this should also look familiar. This is the part where we do event default. What this does is it prevents the page from re-rendering, from refreshing, which will lose all of your state and is not what you want. Event dot, in this case, I would probably have an input here, title equal post title, and so on and so forth. Well, then I would want to grab my new post from something. And then I would call add new post with that new post. So we get a handler which says somewhere up the tree. It doesn't necessarily have to be the immediate parent. It could be the immediate parent. It could be like several steps up the tree. There's state that gets updated by this handler, and I can call this handler with that update however I want. All right, this was a really contrived example that involved writing a bunch of half code. Is this clear? Is there anything else that I can clear up here?
Yeah, make more sense. Definitely make more sense. Thank you. I have another question. Um, is it possible for two components to update the same state value? So if so, would it be considered a good practice to manage this case by using two separate use state?
Um, just to clarify so are we updating the same state as in I have two different like posts that are updating my list of all the available posts, or I have two different components that each have a piece of state of their own and we want to update the first one,
Second one.
second one. I'm
Mirror.
going
Mirror.
to attempt to answer this, and then if I'm answering the wrong question,
Trying to explain better.
yell at me if so. Okay, so let's remember that use state is state specific to this instance of a component. So if I create state up here in my form, and let's say we use this state for something, we don't know what that is yet. Blah, blah, blah. Let's pretend like this is something we implemented. State is specific to the instance of a component that holds it. So I can create a state variable up here. But if I had multiple different create new post components, so I create one, create two, I create three. These are each going to have their own unique copies of state. So if I update state in this first component here and don't do anything to the other ones, then my state will only be updated in the one that gets updated. So we're updating state in number one. Well, my new variable is going to be new state, but I've only updated it in the first one. The others have their own copy of the same state variable. It's called the same thing. It has the same setter function. In the end, our code uses it the same way in every single component, but there is a unique copy of this per instance. Is that clear?
Are so in the case, are they same component? Use the same value?
In
So create new post. I'm confused.
no. So these are different instances of the same component. They all
Yes.
start with the same value. So they each have a copy of this variable, this state variable, It all starts as the same value. This is the default that gets applied when you first create an instance of the component, because it doesn't have any state when you're creating it for the first time. And so it has to just start with something. And so we give it a default value. So they all start with the same, but this is not the same data as this. You cannot access another instance of the component state
Okay.
unless you did like some really contrived thing. This setter function will only update the state for this instance of the component. So if I call the setter with number 1, it updates number 1 state. If I call the setter with number 3, it updates number 3 state. And that's it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank
Did
you.
that answer the question?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Hi, Eli.
Hey, what's up?
Not much. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Pretty good. Sorry, I missed the first 10 or 15 minutes of the meeting. I will watch it in the recorded way. But so you are covering lifting state, controlled component, and managing props, right?
Yes.
No handling props. So the lifting state is clear. So basically, lifting state is necessary in order to interchange state or information between the components through the parent.
Yes.
What is the controlled component mean, and what is this for?
Yes. Also a good question. Okay, so let's do this. Let's pretend that we didn't half-ass this component, and we want this to be an actual form, which is, again, very similar to what you guys are doing for your to-do list apps. You have a form where you can input a new to-do item, and it will create a brand new item and then pass it back up. So the lifting state happens where you sort of assemble your new to-do item inside the form, but your state lives in the parent, in your app component, and so you lift the state back up. Controlling your component is a way of handling input values in a very React kind of way. So what I mean by this is if I am creating a form and I have an input here, and I say that this is a text input where they're going to add the title for their post, and then I have another input down here, which is the URL for their image, which will also be put in as text, and then they can submit it. In normal JavaScript, I can get the value inside of this input at any time I want, but I don't have great access to it in like a React-y kind of way. So the way I would need to get a value for this input if I wanted to use it, like let's say I had a function called do something. If I want to get the value of this, I would need to do a query for the element itself, title input, and I would do a document dot query selector, and I could get my input element. And I guess the easiest way to do this would be to put an ID on it. I think you could query for this title. I don't remember the exact syntax right now. So we're just going to call it the same thing. And we'll do get element by ID instead. So this gets a reference to the element, and then current title value would be title input dot value. These inputs have a property called value, and then I can do whatever I want from there. I can also change the value manually. I could do title input dot value something else. But if I do this is like a vanilla JavaScript way of doing things, and it doesn't hook into React very well. If I update this value, I'm not changing any state. I'm not calling any events. I'm not using any React hooks. And therefore, React isn't really going to have any idea that something has changed. If this input value changes, I might want to like perform a side effect. Like maybe when my post title changes, I want to validate it's a valid title. So it's not empty, no weird or no profanity, etc. And I want to do all of these things every time my title changes. Well, I don't have a great way of listening in on this as it currently stands. Next week, we'll talk about the use effect hook, which is the way that we're going to do this. In the meantime, we're just going to say that it's a thing that you can do with React, but we need like a piece of state to listen into. And we don't have a piece of state. We just have a title. We can change the value. It'll be silent. React won't know anything about it. Our component won't re-render. It won't do anything we want. And so what we generally do in React is we control the content of our input by making this create new post a controlled component. So what this means is we create a piece of state for each of our inputs. So our post title, set post title. Actually, I think we can drop the post from this now. I didn't want to call this title in here because this is like a special attribute on the input on the input element. But now that it's not next to that attribute, I think we can just call it title, and it won't be too confusing. And I can create a piece of state that represents what is the title that is in this input at any moment in time, and what is my image source that is in this other input at any moment in time. And the way we control these inputs is we say, when this component renders, you need to render a value into this input that is equal to whatever's in this title state. And inside of this one, I need to render whatever is in my image source. So every time this component renders, it's going to get whatever's in this state and it's going to put it in the input. This is not super helpful quite yet because what I can do, let's actually open this and see what happens. Oops.
I'm still not catching the necessity of control component. Do I understand you correctly that at this moment we're just trying to get the idea and the control state later will be controlled by use effect function, or no?
Let's discard the use effect entirely. Use effect is just a way that we could listen in for when a title changes and then like do a side effect, like validating that it's a valid title. I'm going to totally take this out. This was just a contrived example for something we would like to do in React that we don't have a way of doing when we can just update the value property using that document.get element and so on and so forth. And then element.value. If I just set the value, React doesn't know about that. And so we can't do any cool stuff with it. So what we do is we specify the value, which is our state, and then we specify a change handler. And when this changes, I'm going to run a function on the event. So this event is like a form event where it represents the change that just happened on this input. And I can get event.target.value the target being the input, since it's an event of the input. And then the value is this property up here that we assigned to it, except it's changed. This input's value has changed, which trigger this event. And so therefore, this is going to be slightly different than this. It's going to be whatever just changed added on the end. And so I would update my state here to be the newly changed value. All right. So now if I run this, oops, that's why it's so big. I broke it. Hold on, let me fix this really quick. Create new post component. Handle submit is not defined. Just fill this in for now with a dummy value. So this input is not going to do anything. So let's comment this out for a second. And we'll just keep our singular input here. So I can type in as I see fit. I can still edit this input. It works exactly the same as if I didn't use a piece of state here. But you'll notice if I put a console.log of my title, I would expect that every time my title changes, this state variable needs to change. And so this console.log should print out a different value. And you'll see that this is in fact the case. Every time I type a new thing, it prints the new value. Why does it print this new value? It prints the new value because it's triggering a re-render of this component. What we've done is we have like controlled this input with a state variable, and then we've updated the state when the input changes, which forces our component to re-render the new value. So the order of events here is this component renders the first time, this empty string is set as the value. We type into the input, which changes the input's value and triggers this event. We get the new value, whatever's in there currently, and then we update that state. It causes our component to render again, and the new value is now inputted into this input. And then we can trigger it again by changing and so on and so forth. And this lets us re-render our component. So if anything has changed, it's going to actually recognize those changes. It's not going to just leave our component be. And B, it lets us sort of react to changes to that specific thing. So again, we haven't done this yet. This will be next week. But a use effect allows us to run unrelated code when a certain thing changes. So let's say I have that function that validates post title, and this returns true if it's good, if title is empty, then it returns false to indicate that it's not a valid post title. Well, I want to run this when my title changes. Anytime I change that title, I should revalidate it. Well, I need to listen to some state that has changed, and when that state changes, then I can run this unrelated thing, is title val. And the way I would do this is with a use effect that listens for a change to the title variable and then runs this code inside the function. I can only do this if I control my input with a state variable. If I don't have a state variable, I can't listen in because there's no state that's changing that I then want to run code after that changes. If I were to get rid of this state and we got rid of this controlling element, and I refresh the page, what did I do? I gotta comment this out too. So I'm no longer controlling this component. It sets its own value on its own. I can type in here, no problem. And this input is going to, in fact, show its up-to-date value. But if I were to, once again, try and log that value, so I get my element, document.queries, get element by ID, title input, and then I console.log element.value. I would also expect naively that this would print the new value every time that title input changes, right? Oh, what did I do this time? Element is null. Huh, this is crazy. It's right here. Title input. Huh. All right. Maybe I can't do this right here. Check value. I think what's happening is it's trying to query for an element the first time this component is rendered, at which point it hasn't constructed the output yet, and the input doesn't exist because we haven't rendered it to the page yet. And so instead, we're going to just check the value in a function. And we'll say that if the element is not null, then we want to print it out. And I can type in here and it will never print anything because it's not re-rendering the component. It's not recalling this function over and over. The component doesn't re-render when I change the value if we don't control it. We get a lot of benefits if we control it. We get the benefit of listening in on it. We get the benefit of having easy access to it anywhere. I don't have to do this query selector. I just have whatever the current variable is. I just pull from that state variable. And it hooks into other React stuff that we'll learn about in the future. Is
Thank
that
you.
mostly clear?
It's mostly clear, but what is the usability of this? I mean, I would see that it would be quite useful for the search elements when you type, and as you type, it probably would re-render the component and or information where you address into the database. It will provide you like immediate search result. But what would be the other usability for this approach?
Yeah, those are two really great examples. Like as I'm typing, if I want to have like suggestions underneath of what you're searching for, like on Google, then I would need to re-render those suggestions when my input changes. And so the component has to re-render and it selects new suggestions for you and then shows them underneath. So that's a great example. Other examples would be, I want to have a form that creates a new product. Well, I probably want to control all of those inputs with state variables. And then when I submit that form and you send it back up this state tree, I just gather all of those state variables together and send them back up the tree. Other things you could do, really just like anything where as you're making a change to an input, you want something to happen at the same time. So, trying to think of other good examples.
Would it be useful, or is any way is used for the Redux updates of the page?
What do you mean Redux? Redux, usually, I think it's like a library that manages your state in a totally different way from what we're doing here.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm using I'm using probably a different. I thought Redux was what do you call it? Approach which allows you to be on the same page constantly. Like when you scroll, you don't have to. It's like a constant re-rendering of the page, and you sort of like you're scrolling down, and you remain on the same list all the time. Or it's different.
In a React context, I would define Redux as like a state management library. So normally in React, what we do is we have a bunch of different state variables. So I can create like my state variable 1 and state 2 and state 3. And with Redux, basically we just have all of our state in one global location. And everywhere that cares about the state can just look in that one global location. It's like we're aggregating all of our state together into one object, and then we just pull the specific properties that we want. And when that global object changes, then anything that cares about specific properties will know that it needs to re-render. So it's like a different style of passing around state compared to vanilla JavaScript that comes with its own benefits and tradebacks. I personally never used it, but I'm I'm trying to like think about what you're talking about. You might be talking about like infinite scrolling, where you have like a bunch of different posts, like on Instagram, and then you go down to the bottom and it like loads several new posts for you.
Yeah. Is it the same or no?
No, probably not the same. I don't know if there's like a React terminology for it other than infinite scrolling, which I think is just like the colloquial term. But yeah, even that could be pretty useful. Like if you have a bunch of different results on your page and you're changing like the value of your input and you want to show different results on that page, then you want to reprocess that input.
Eli, my bad. It's not Redux. It's Ajax.
Ajax.
Yeah.
That's pretty similar. This cannot be what you're talking about. This is a football team.
So basically, Ajax is a technology that updates web pages without reloading.
Ajax web application. Send and receive data without interfering. Yes. This is very similar to the concept of React in general. What this is like an old solution that tries to solve the problem of, well, if I want to go to a different page and do different things, that page is a separate HTML page that I have to download from a server and then open, and that will get rid of anything that I've done on my previous page, which is a separate HTML page. And so React kind of does the same thing that I'm seeing described here, although I might be totally wrong, or I might be telling you something inaccurate. But React does the same kind of thing where it's all one page. It's a single page application, and it just changes the contents of your page by like inserting and removing elements.
Right. I'm sorry. I'm probably led you away from control component. I'm trying to tie my comprehension to the usability of it. So the search technology or the search method is clear. Where else could it be used? Or let me rephrase my question: Do we have to use the controlled component approach all the time, or we have to use it only in certain cases?
I would say in React, you should be using it all the time. I think it's the most clear way of doing things with expected behavior. we know that if we update a state variable, it's going to refresh our component, and whatever happens when it refreshes is going to get triggered. If you're not using a controlled component, then you might expect that something is going to re-render, but it actually doesn't, and that's a bug. And you also just like won't have the flexibility of writing code in the future that depends on a re-render. Like, again, if we want to run our validator after our component re-renders with a new title, we can only do that if our component re-renders. And so if we like started writing code and we didn't use a controlled component, and then like way down the line, we want to add a validator function, well, then we'd have to convert it over to a controlled component, but we've already written a bunch of code and that might be really challenging, just depending on how much is there. I would say in React, if you have an input, it should be a controlled component, basically every time. It gives you benefits. It makes sense. You know what to expect. I don't think there's any reason not to make it a controlled component.
Okay, thank you. So basically, we have to learn this approach and just know by heart.
Yes, very important for any forms, any inputs, anything which you'll use on every site you ever make. All right, I'm not going to talk about anything new here. I have a hard cutoff at 8, so I got about 4 minutes. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thanks everyone for popping in for an hour. Make sure to do the sign-in form on your way out, and I will talk to you guys next week. If without controlled components, HTML input won't talk with React, and it won't emit when conditionals are met. Yes, controlled components, by introducing state, let us hook into React. Basically, all the cool React-y stuff that you can do, including a bunch of stuff we haven't learned yet, all depends on state variables. State is the way that React knows that your component has changed and it needs to do things. And you can use your useEffect hook and other hooks to sort of latch onto that state, and when it changes, do something cool. And you're going to do a lot of that. Like, that's just the way that you write React code. And so we have to use controlled components so that React can sort of hook into that when our input changes.
Gotcha. Thank you, Ellie.
No problem. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Talk to you next week.